Welcome to your personalized deep dive. You wanted to know how Trump pulled off this win against Harris in 2024,
Yeah, it was a surprise to a lot of people.
to say the least. So we're going to dig into some articles, some video clips to see if we can figure out what happened. I mean, no one really saw this coming, right?
Mm.
Trump won even with those criminal convictions and everything that went down on January 6th.
It's interesting, after an election, we often just focus on who won and lost, but we don't always look at those underlying trends that led to the outcome.
And that's important, isn't it? Because it's like, it's bigger than just one election.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's pointing to something bigger, like these huge shifts happening in America, like how the media works, how candidates connect or don't connect with voters.
Exactly. And understanding how this all happened, it's important for everyone, even if you're not, a political junkie.
Yeah.
This is about the future of the country.
It is. It really is. Okay, so let's set the scene. It's November 2024, and Trump is back in the White House. And one of our sources, this WHYY piece, Election 2024, 9 Takeaways, Why Trump Defeated Harris, they point out that Republicans had a couple of advantages right out of the gate. One of the big ones was this, economic anxiety, even though, things weren't actually that bad.
Right. That's what's so fascinating about this whole thing. You had these positive economic indicators, but voters still felt this deep unease, and they were pointing the finger at the Biden administration.
Yeah, and that's what's crazy. The U.S. economy was doing better than a lot of other developed countries.
It was. And the Federal Reserve, they tried to tackle inflation by raising interest rates.
But then that just made it harder for people to borrow money.
Exactly. More expensive to buy a house or a car. And even though they eventually lowered rates again, it wasn't fast enough for voters to feel any relief before they headed to the polls.
So you've got this economic anxiety. And then you add in another factor, the mail vote. The WHYY article shows this huge gender divide in how people voted.
It was significant. Trump won over men in every age group. Harris did win the majority of women, but not by enough to offset Trump's gains among men.
And what was interesting was the shift among Latino men,
Yeah.
They really leaned toward Trump.
He did. It was a major factor in several swing states.
So it really makes you think, right? How is the political landscape changing? And what's influencing those decisions?
Definitely. And it raises a big question. Did this election show that America's just not ready for a woman president?
That's a tough one.
It is. The article mentions this poll that showed men were more distrustful of Harris's policies compared to women.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, and you have to wonder, was that distrust specifically about Harris, or was it about women in positions of power in general?
Was it about gender, policy, or a mix of everything?
Right.
There's a lot to unpack there. All right, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about how Trump used media and messaging. His team was really smart about it.
Yeah, they were.
They really focused on non-traditional media, like podcasts and online interviews, to reach a younger audience.
And a largely male audience. They went straight to podcasts like Joe Rogan's, Logan Paul, Theo Vaughn, even Aiden Roth.
That's right. They bypassed the traditional news outlets.
And get this, the article says that Trump actually consulted his son, Barron, about which podcasts to appear on. Like Barron, being Gen Z, knows what that younger crowd is into.
That's smart, recognizing the power of those online platforms, speaking directly to their target audience. They knew the old rules of political engagement just don't apply the same way anymore.
Okay, now let's bring in another big player, Elon Musk.
He was a major force in this election. He used his platform, X, to share his views and try to influence voters, especially in those swing states. And he was pushing those claims about the Democrats importing illegal immigrants to swing states to rig the election. He even talked about it on Joe Rogan's podcast, which was a big platform for Trump during the campaign.
And even though those claims are controversial, they tapped into those anxieties we talked about earlier.
Right. And get this. The article says Musk actually went to Pennsylvania, handing out large checks and fueling those concerns about election integrity.
Wow. That level of personal involvement really shows how much he wanted to impact the election.
Absolutely. So here we are. Trump is back in the Oval Office. What happens now? What can we expect?
Well, based on his campaign promises and the work of groups like the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025, I think we can expect to see some big changes.
The article talks about immigration, a crackdown on his political enemies, maybe even deploying the military for domestic issues. And of course, his push for a national abortion ban. That's a huge potential shift in how the country is run.
It is, and it raises some serious concerns, and this is where you come in. How much of his agenda will become reality? What kind of legal and political battles are we in for over the next 4 years?
Those are some big questions. Where you keep digging into those. It's amazing how they use Barron, you know? Like he was their secret weapon.
It shows they really understood how the media landscape is changing, especially for young men.
Yeah, they're not getting their news from the same places anymore. And the Time article, how Donald Trump won the 2024 election, they go even deeper into this whole podcast strategy. They call it like a through line in his comeback.
Interesting.
It seems like they knew like the mainstream media would be tougher on them, more critical. So they went where they could control the narrative.
That makes sense.
The Time article even quotes someone from the campaign saying, "Men cost us the last election. Our objective became not to let that happen again."
So it was a deliberate strategy to win back those male voters.
The ones who maybe voted for Biden last time?
Exactly. Young men, especially those who don't usually vote, they saw that as an opportunity. They really painted Biden as, like, too old, out of touch.
And those voters, they were more open to Trump's message, especially when it came to the economy.
Right. They weren't watching CNN or reading the New York Times. They were listening to Joe Rogan, watching YouTube, scrolling through social media.
And that's exactly where Trump went.
To meet them on their turf.
And the Time article, it actually has some really interesting details about how Trump ended up on Aiden Ross's show. It all started with a list.
And a golf course.
Yeah. Trump's advisors, they gave him this list of podcasts, but then he surprised them. He was like, "Did you talk to Barron about this?"
Wow.
Like, he knew his son had a better sense of what young people are into.
A Gen Z consultant.
Exactly. And Barron pointed them to Aiden Ross, who, let's be honest, is not really known for, like, political commentary.
No, not really.
But that's what's so fascinating. They didn't care about his, like, controversial past or anything.
They saw him as a way to reach a huge young audience.
Yeah, like, normalize Trump's image a bit.
And it worked. That interview, it went viral. Millions of views.
It's such a good example of, like, thinking outside the box. The old rules just don't apply anymore. And speaking of thinking outside the box, let's talk about Elon Musk. Says he put over $100 million into this election.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, and it wasn't just money. He was super involved in those key states, like especially Pennsylvania. Imagine. He was actually there handing out million-dollar checks to people who signed his petition.
$1 million checks.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Talk about influence.
Yeah.
And then there's X, his social media platform. It basically became this megaphone for his views, pushing those anxieties about the election, that whole thing about the Democrats importing illegal immigrants.
Right, which is, concerning because it shows how misinformation can spread.
And manipulate voters, especially when it's coming from someone like Musk. But he wasn't just doing it out of the goodness of his heart,
What do you mean?
The article suggests that he was promised a pretty powerful position in a second Trump administration.
Ah, interesting. Like what?
They were going to put him in charge of a government efficiency commission to oversee all those agencies that regulate his companies.
Wow, that's a big conflict of interest.
For sure. Okay, let's go back to those podcasts for a minute. Do you remember that Joe Rogan interview with Trump back in 2023?
Yeah, before the election even started.
Right. And it was pretty revealing. It gave us a glimpse into Trump's, mindset.
It did. Rogan's podcast, with its huge audience, gave Trump a way to bypass the traditional media, control the message.
Exactly. And Trump, he did not hold back. Went on for 3 hours, ranting about everything. The deep state rigged elections. He even did this impression of Biden shuffling around like he was lost. It was kind of funny, but also a little scary.
It's part of his strategy, Using humor, stereotypes to undermine his opponents, make himself look like the strong leader.
And then there was how he talked about Kamala, calling her low IQ, incompetent. Said she was a puppet being controlled by, shadowy forces.
That's tough to hear.
It got pretty dark.
It's unfortunately a pattern with him, isn't it?
Yeah. Especially when he's talking about women. But here's where it gets interesting. He claimed Harris stole his idea about eliminating taxes on tips.
Seriously.
Yeah. Could you believe that? He was the innovator.
Always trying to paint himself as the one with good ideas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he even said Harris lied about working at McDonald's as a teenager.
Oh, wow.
Because he was obsessed with making her seem untrustworthy. But the Rogan interview, it wasn't all just attacks,
Right.
Trump also laid out his vision for a second term. And let's just say, it was intense.
Intense how?
He promised mass deportations, using the National Guard to round up undocumented immigrants, Talked about cracking down on his enemies, maybe even using the military for domestic issues.
It was more of the same hardline rhetoric from his first presidency.
Yeah, and he was still fixated on that border wall, bragging about how much he built before. And even though it wasn't popular with a lot of voters, he talked about a national abortion ban.
So he's really sticking to those core social issues.
Definitely. So here we are. He's back in the White House.
And based on what he's saying, it could be a wild ride.
Man, this deep dive has been like a whirlwind. We've uncovered so much, the strategies, the media stuff, the anxieties that led to Trump's comeback. It's a lot.
It is. And it's crazy how it all connects, right? The economy, the cultural divides, the media, Elon Musk, like all these pieces coming together to put him back in office.
It's wild. And now we've got to deal with the reality of a second Trump term. And the implications are, well, they're pretty huge. I mean, he's talking about making some massive changes.
He is. And he could reshape a lot of things: immigration, the military, even social issues like abortion. And he's got powerful people in his corner. Musk, those conservative think tanks, they've been working towards this for a while.
It's scary, honestly. One thing that really worries me is what this means for our democracy. I mean, we've seen Trump ignore the rules, undermine the system. What happens now?
That's a valid concern. And the Time article uses the term massive purge.
A purge.
Yeah, they're saying Trump's planning to fire anyone in the government who isn't completely loyal to him. He's already talking about appointing a new attorney general to go after his political rivals.
That's chilling. Like, he wants to control everything, make his own reality where facts don't matter.
It's a dangerous path. The Time article even quotes some experts on authoritarianism who say America is on the brink of crisis.
That's a serious warning. So what can we do? It feels like we're just along for the ride,
We're not powerless. We have to stay informed, stay engaged, and support those organizations fighting to protect our democracy. Hold those in power accountable.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed, like we can't make a difference. But we can. We can speak up. We can demand better.
Exactly. This election was a wake-up call. Democracy is fragile, and we have to participate to protect it.
It makes you think, Trump's victory, it wasn't just about him. It was about us, too. Our choices, the things we believe, the fears we have.
It reflects where we are as a country right now. A lot of division, uncertainty. The world's changing so fast.
But what now? What happens next?
Yeah.
It's a big question. But we can't just sit back and do nothing.
We have to stay informed, keep talking about these issues, and hold our leaders accountable. The future of our democracy depends on it.
Well, that's it for this deep dive. We hope this helped you understand what happened. And remember, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep fighting for what you believe in.